Good morning, everyone. I'm Anna Palmer. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. Thank you so much for joining us for our last editorial event of the year. Woo! I want to give a huge shout out to the whole Punchbowl News team, our events and production partners. It has been an incredible year, and we are so thankful to be culminating all of these events and these powerful editorial conversations with this morning's pop-up news conversation with Senator Susan Collins. A big thank you to the Alzheimer's Association for partnering with us to make this conversation possible. Andrew Desiderio, Punchbowl News senior congressional reporter, will interview Senator Collins. They're going to talk news of the day, nothing happening, of course, as well as the future of Alzheimer's disease, diagnosis, and treatment. Afterward, I'll be joined on stage by Alzheimer's Association President and CEO Joanne Pike for a fireside chat. As always, you can find Punchbowl News on all social media channels at Punchbowl News. We encourage you to share this conversation. Thank you so much, and we'll let the conversation begin.
All right, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Senator Collins. I want to start off with some news of the day questions, of course, as we always do at our Punchbowl News events here, Senator. As you know, right now, the Senate is about to have votes on health care bills. The Obamacare subsidies expire at the end of the month. You've been involved in those negotiations, but it seems like these votes next week, or just might be one vote, are going to be messaging bills, messaging exercises intended to boost either party's position in this political battle, if you will. Why has a bipartisan deal on this issue been so elusive? You've been in the middle of so many bipartisan deals over the years. And do you plan to support what Democrats are putting forward, which is a 3-year clean extension of the subsidies?
Well, first, good morning, everyone. Before we get into the news, I wanted to make sure I said hello. Sometimes, Andrew, there are significant differences in how people view an issue. And that's the case with the Affordable Care Act enhanced premium tax credits, which were implemented during COVID. So the question is, how do we prevent enormous increases in premiums from hitting self-employed individuals, individuals working for small businesses that don't receive health insurance through the workplace? And there are legitimate differences of opinion on those issues. I am still optimistic that even if we have party line votes next week, that we can come together with a bipartisan bill. I was involved over Thanksgiving with a Zoom that had 23 members, both House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans participating on how we could bring things together. To me, what we should look at is a 2-year package. The first year, we really cannot make significant changes that will help bring down the cost of health care. But what we could do is put an income cap on those who qualify for the enhanced tax credit. Right now, if you're a family of 4 living in Augusta, Maine, making $325,000, which, believe me, very few people in Augusta, Maine would make that kind of money, you still qualify for some kind of subsidy that is a taxpayer-funded subsidy. So I talked to many of my Democrat colleagues about putting some sort of income cap. The cap was done away with during COVID. It existed originally in the ACA. The second change we could make in the first year is to do away with no premium,
zero premium plans.
Zero premium plans. And that would help to eliminate any possibility of fraud. And it gives everybody a little bit of skin in the game. You can't have those be high, they can't be prohibited. But those are 2 changes I think we could make in the first year while extending the credits. In the second year, we could make more significant changes aimed at lowering the cost of health care and the cost of the ACA premiums.
So if the only thing the Senate votes on next week is the Democratic proposal, the 3-year clean extension, would you be a yes or a no on that?
I'm not going to give you a preview on that. I told Andrew before we came out that I knew he would try to get a scoop today.
Spoiler, I've covered Senator Collins long enough to know that she rarely reveals her vote before the vote actually happens, but she knew I had to ask. Senator, you're obviously up for re-election next year. This year has been interesting, to say the least. The Senate has been in session for more days this calendar year than probably your entire tenure in the Senate. At the same time, it's been very frustrating for someone like you, who you're the chair of the Appropriations Committee. You're trying to get a minibus package through right now, dealing with fiscal hawks, more conservative members who are holding that up right now. At the same time, you've got, of course, an administration that's been sort of running roughshod over Congress's traditional power of the purse. You've been critical of Russ Vought, the OMB director, in that respect. Do any of those dynamics make you feel so frustrated that you second guess whether you even want to run for re-election?
Well, I still plan to run for re-election. I've not made an official announcement yet. But, you know, what we're seeing, Andrew, in the last cycle and this one is people who are in the middle are tending to leave. They're tending to retire. I'm the only Republican senator left in all of New England. When I first started out, each of the 6 New England states had Republicans as well as Democrats. Some of them just had Republicans, such as New Hampshire back then, representing the state. I think that was much healthier. It was a much less polarized era. And it's important to have voices of people who want to solve problems. I'm not one who tends to rant and rave on certain news shows. Instead, I like to bring people together, search for common ground, as we have on Alzheimer's disease, and try to get things done. That's what I think people want. And unfortunately, many people are getting discouraged, and they tend to be those who are in the center. What we need in this country is for those who are in the center to be as riled up and as involved as those on the far left and the far right.
Mm-hmm. So you're not so discouraged at this point that you're thinking you would go the route of the others, like, you know, Senator Portman, for example, in recent years, but you are recognizing the reality, it seems like, that it is harder to get things done in the Senate.
It is harder to get things done, but I can still point to a number of accomplishments that I have been able to do. In the last year, for example, I got a bill that I've been working on for literally 20 years that removed 2 unfair provisions in the Social Security Act that penalized people who had earned their benefits in the private sector and then gone on to teach, or had a spouse who was in the private sector. It was called the Social Security Fairness Act. And I can't tell you how many Mainers have come up to me and said that it made the difference between just barely getting by and having a comfortable standard of living. That really touches me, and it's one of the things that motivates me.
I want to shift now to the topic of the day, Alzheimer's disease, research, prevention, and funding, critically, because you are the chair of the Appropriations Committee, so you have a really big role in all of this. But I want to step back a little bit. So you are the founder and co-chair of the Congressional Task Force on Alzheimer's disease. How did you first get involved in working on this issue in the Senate?
Well, like many people, my family has been harmed by this devastating disease. I lost my father, my grandfather, my 2 uncles, and a brother-in-law recently to Alzheimer's. So I've seen firsthand how absolutely devastating it is, not only for the person who has Alzheimer's, but also for the caregivers, which are usually family members. And it is just a horrific disease. It's also one of our nation's most costly diseases. Last year alone, we've spent $360 billion caring for people with Alzheimer's. If the current trajectory continues, we'll spend $1 trillion on Alzheimer's by the year 2050. So it's something that, whether you look at it from a humanitarian perspective or a fiscal perspective, that warrants our paying a lot more attention to it.
Just a couple weeks ago, you introduced the Alzheimer's Screening and Prevention Act, or the ASAP Act. The legislation aims to have Medicare cover some of these newly developed blood tests for Alzheimer's, for early detection, rather. Tell us a little bit about this effort, and have you spoken with the CMS Administrator, Mehmet Oz, about this, and has he been receptive to this concept?
Well, let me give you a little history on this bill, which I worked very closely with the Alzheimer's Association in developing, and was very pleased to have their expert advice and support. We had, for the first time, new medications come on the market. In the previous administration, one is called Leqembi. And if administered very early, it has been shown to slow the rate of cognitive decline by as much as 30%. That is huge. That is a breakthrough. And yet, despite FDA approving the two drugs, CMS was refusing to cover it. So I got a group of members of my Alzheimer's task force to write to the Secretary of HHS, Becerra. And also I had numerous conversations with the CMS administrator. Finally, they agreed to cover it, although there are some additional roadblocks as far as being listed as part of a registry, et cetera. And I know a person, Ralph is his first name, in Portland, who was in an early clinical trial for one of these drugs. He is doing so well. It is absolutely remarkable. He just ran a marathon, by the way. And so I've seen firsthand the difference it can make. And CMS should stay in its lane. CMS is not in charge of approving drugs. That's the job of the FDA. So if the FDA approves a drug or a new test, then CMS, in my view, ought to cover it. So to get to your current day question, one of the really exciting research developments in Alzheimer's is a new blood test that can identify a biomarker that is an indicator of Alzheimer's. And it used to be you had to have a spinal tap or a PET scan or elaborate tests to determine whether or not you had Alzheimer's. And in some cases, it really wasn't confirmed until there was an autopsy. And so the breakthrough of having a blood test that could enable the kind of early treatment and planning is just an amazing development. So this blood test has been approved by FDA. And again, think of someone who's living in northern Maine, where there may not be access to a PET scan, or there may not be the ability to do a spinal tap. These are expensive, difficult tests also, and they have to drive a very long distance to get them in some cases. So the idea that the primary care physician could administer this blood test is very exciting.
And then have Medicare cover it.
That's what we have, and that's what the bill that I've introduced, the ASAP bill, would do, is it would require, essentially, CMS to cover these new tests, these new treatments. And I have had one conversation with Dr. Oz about it when we were doing our pre-nomination hearing discussion. And so he is aware of it and how strongly I feel about it. But I think it's important we get the bill through just to make sure there's no confusion about this. But this is such an important breakthrough. I went to a conference in Maine where one of our gerontologists was teaching physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and primary care physicians about this test, and they were so excited about being able to offer this. But if it's not reimbursed under Medicare, will it be available?
Right. We talked a lot about your role on the Appropriations Committee, playing a crucial role in all of this. The committee has approved NIH funding increases for the next fiscal year for research, for example. But as you know, the Trump administration has sought to rescind or pause NIH funding in general this year. How confident are you that if and when this is actually signed into law, the administration will adhere to it?
Well, we've put a number of guide rails in the bill to try to protect against the possibility of grants being rescinded despite our rejection of the 41% cut that the administration's budget proposed for NIH. It's not just NIH, it's also National Science Foundation, it's DOD, medical research. There were a lot of cuts in medical research. Instead of cutting medical research by 41%, we were able to increase it by $400 million. And I'm really proud of that. And that bill was approved by a vote of 26-3 in the Appropriations Committee. Shelley Moore Capito and Tammy Baldwin are the chair and ranking members of that subcommittee. Patty Murray is my counterpart at the full committee. We all worked as a team to make sure that didn't go through. The bill also includes language requiring us, the Appropriations Committee, to be notified if grants are being clawed back or paused so that we can evaluate whether or not it's justified or whether or not it's an attempt to get around the increased funding that we have. So that's an important guardrail as well.
You mentioned the 26-3 vote in the Appropriations Committee. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that it's actually been Republicans in the Senate taking the lead in pushing back against the administration on some of these rescissions and proposed funding cuts. When you see a piece of legislation pass by that big of a margin in any Senate committee, I think that represents some pretty strong pushback to the administration.
It definitely does. And I'm really proud that we could put together that strong a vote. Now we're trying to bring the bills to the floor, a 5-bill package. Right now, we have a few problems that we're trying to work through. But I think that this is very exciting. Listen, from my perspective, there's no investment that is more worthwhile than our investment in biomedical research. And that is why the very first hearing that I held as the new chair of the Appropriations Committee was entitled Biomedical Research, Keeping America's Edge in Innovation. And that's what we need to do.
Last year, President Biden signed into law one of your pieces of legislation, the BOLD Act, which is a 5-year reauthorization of critical Alzheimer's and brain health initiatives. But as you pressed Secretary Kennedy on at a recent hearing, many of the staff at HHS and CDC charged with implementing that law were let go, were put on administrative leave. What level of confidence do you have at this point that those initiatives and that reauthorization that you spearheaded, it's $33 million per year over 5 years, can actually move forward given what Secretary Kennedy at HHS has sought to do?
It's something I'm obviously watching very carefully and have had many conversations with the Secretary and other officials at HHS about. But here's what makes me optimistic about the BOLD Act, and I do believe this is due to my persistence and intervention. In the president's budget, the funding is included for the BOLD Act. Mm-hmm. So if they were going to terminate it, it would be in the budget. And instead, the funding is included. And that law is really important in terms of improving access to early diagnosis, helping caregivers. It takes more of a public health approach to this disease.
We mentioned, or we talked about the ASAP Act, and I know that's something that's your sort of next big priority on this issue. Looking forward, what else are you thinking about legislatively or otherwise as you try to sort of continue your efforts on Alzheimer's prevention and early detection?
I want to see us look at a variety of factors that play into whether or not a person gets Alzheimer's. I am convinced that this is a multifactorial disease, and we now have 2 drugs that attack the amyloid plaque that is in the brain. We have clinical trials that are going on looking at the role of lifestyles, including one sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association that is looking at everything from the Mediterranean diet to cognitive interactions to heart disease. I'm very interested in the role of 2 other factors. One is inflammation, which I'm convinced is a factor. The other is the role that tau, which is a protein, tangles play in the brain. On a lot of these, it's difficult, like the tau tangles, to determine, is that a consequence or a cause of the disease? Amyloid plaque, is that a consequence or a cause? It may be both, and I think we're going to find that there are a number of targets that we're going to need to get to the bottom of this extremely complex disease. But I'll tell you, I was at the University of California in San Francisco's brain lab recently. I got to see 1,000 preserved brains. That was an unusual experience. And it was a credit to the medical center there that many people had donated their brains after being treated there. And one of the scientists actually told me that he believes we will have an effective treatment for Alzheimer's in 5 years. Now, wouldn't that be just fabulous? But the good news is, after years of very disappointing clinical trials, we're making progress finally. And here's why. When I first started the Alzheimer's Task Force in the Senate, we were only spending $500 million a year. We are now spending in the neighborhood of $4 billion a year. And that makes sense given the costly disease.
And
thank you.
and lastly, Senator, I want to note that the administration has requested a funding increase specifically for Alzheimer's funding. So does that give you some optimism here that despite the actions the administration has taken to cut back on NIH funding, to lay off employees, that they at least maybe recognize the need to get behind something like this, which you guys have done in your appropriations bills as well?
I do think it's a very good sign. If I were the president, I would embrace this and do a warp speed approach the way we did with COVID.
Right.
And I think this is something that affects so many families. And it's absolutely devastating to look into the eyes of a loved one and receive no sign of recognition in return. You lose the person before you physically lose the person. And it's just heartbreaking. And it also puts a tremendous toll on the caregivers. My mother took care of my father at home for years before he spent the last part of his life in the veterans home in our hometown of Caribou. And it takes a tremendous toll. And think of people who leave their jobs to take care of a parent with Alzheimer's. We have a shortage of professional caregivers, and sometimes there's a resistance to having an outside caregiver come in and provide that care. And that's why when you ask what else am I working on, caregivers, providing assistance to caregivers, providing some sort of tax incentive so that they can afford. They bear a lot of costs themselves. It's uncompensated care, and we need respite care. It would have been so helpful to families if they have a place to take their loved one so they just get a bit of a break from the 24-hour around-the-clock care. So in addition to pushing forward on approval by CMS without delays, the ASAP bill, continuing our exciting investment in research that's paying off, I'm also focused on helping caregivers.
Well, Senator Collins, on that important recognition, thank you very much for joining us this
Thank
morning.
you.
You've got to get back to the Capitol to twist some more arms on that minibus package, and I'll be berating you in the hallway. Not berating you, asking you questions in the halls about it.
Asking brilliant questions, right?
Appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us. And
Thank you.
Our founder and CEO, Anna Palmer, will now have a fireside chat with Joanne Pike, the president and CEO of the Alzheimer's Association.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, a big thank you to Andrew and Senator Collins for that conversation, and it really tees us up well, Joanne, to chat about what you all are doing and kind of what you're seeing in research and in government funding. First of all, I just want to talk a little bit. We obviously heard Senator Collins talk a lot about her efforts, especially when it comes to the ASAP Act, focused on screening and prevention. Can you talk about the experience a patient might have if this legislation is enacted, and why you think it's so important for coverage for tests that maybe aren't widely available at this time?
Yeah, thank you. And I think Senator Collins did such a great job of highlighting some of the real issues that the ASAP Act addresses. And that's the people side of this. We need coverage for advances in innovation that come out of the pipeline. We really believe that blood-based screening and testing is the future of Alzheimer's diagnosis. And ASAP protects that access to those types of screening measures as we see them come out. But the real people implication for ASAP and the ability to access some of these innovative diagnostics that are coming through the pipeline is ultimately, as you heard Senator Collins talk about, the ability to access this, democratizing diagnosis in a way that really levels the playing field from rural America to urban America, and from primary care to specialist care, ensuring that those innovations like blood-based biomarker testing is available to everyone.
Let's talk about that patient experience, because I think as Senator Collins so kind of accurately talked about Alzheimer's is something that a lot of people deal with, right? My grandfather had it, the caregiving aspect of it. I mean, so many of my friends now with parents and other relations are dealing with this. It touches so many people. Can you talk a bit about the experience some might have in a doctor's office 5 years from now if all of these, kind of legislative efforts are successful?
Yeah, and I think even the experience today is very different than what we saw 5 years ago. The fact is that there has been so much progress in recent history, where you heard Senator Collins talk about we now have 2 FDA-approved treatments. We have advances in diagnosis. That translates to a different experience for individuals and people on the ground right now. People are more likely to have their symptoms or their questions answered in a doctor's office. They're more likely to have access to a quicker diagnosis. They are more likely to be offered treatment where appropriate for them. And if they happen to be in a place that is a guide participant, something that also Senator Collins advanced for us, they're going to receive comprehensive dementia care within their specialist and their general practitioner care that they're receiving as caregivers and as individuals receiving treatment or as part of that diagnosis. So the experience today is even better than it was 5 years ago. However, if you think fast forward 5 years from now, the advances that we're seeing come out of the pipeline are going to dramatically begin to shift what that experience looks like. Blood-based biomarkers are going to be a significant part of making diagnosis happen faster within primary care, along with specialty care. We're going to see advances within technology that really move our ability to look at data and create a faster treatment pipeline because of the use of things like artificial intelligence and better integration within the healthcare system of the technologies that we already have. We know that the treatment pipeline is more robust than it has ever been, thanks to our bipartisan congressional champions like Senator Collins in advancing the research agenda at NIA and the funds that we have available as a result of that. So we absolutely believe that the next 5 years are going to shift tremendously that patient and family journey within Alzheimer's care and treatment access.
It's interesting to hear the senator talk a lot about kind of the future and what she sees coming down the pike. You recently attended the Clinical Trials on Alzheimer's Disease Conference, a global meeting of Alzheimer's researchers. What were your key takeaways? What are some of the things that should be on our radar that you were learning about?
Yeah, I think the biggest key takeaway for me is a few fronts. One, there's more in the pipeline than ever before. Right now, there are over 180 clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias right now that target over 130 novel drugs. That is a great indicator of the investment that has been made ultimately by Congress and the private sector within this space right now. We're seeing those report outs, but the other thing that we're learning is not just on the treatment side, but also on the risk reduction and prevention side as well. What can we be doing? We had our own report out at CTAD this year around the next steps of our U.S. Pointer trial that really looked at lifestyle intervention and the continued learnings that are coming out of that research study on what individuals can be doing to create better protection on their own brain health.
Yeah, so let's double click on U.S. Pointer. That's a trial that's going on. What impact does it have? What should people know about that?
Yeah, thank you for asking about this, because this is really exciting as an individual and your own ability to impact your disease risk. So we looked at 2 interventions with U.S. Pointer, one being a self-guided intervention on nutrition, physical activity, social and cognitive intervention, and heart health. And then the other one was a structured intervention that had a lot more accountability and group mechanisms to hold the participants accountable to their engagement on this. And what we found was that structured intervention on those 4 areas significantly improved in individuals' cognitive health, their resiliency to protect against cognitive decline. In fact, that structured group ultimately saved about 1 to 2 years in their brain health, their cognition, through the course of this research study. And as we continue to look at some of the data and the ancillary studies that are around that, we're learning more. So even just this week when we were at CTAD, we talked about sleep and the benefits of sleep. We talked about blood pressure control and how blood pressure regulation can help with that resiliency within the brain.
So we're in Washington, D.C. A lot's happening in the Capitol with funding and policy, but you all are also at the state level. Talk a little bit about what the association is doing to bring this latest information kind of beyond Washington, but into the states.
Yeah, it's really important to think about how not only we have to impact the federal policy level, but also states have a very important role to play from the standpoint of protections and access to care. And so we have, as an organization, really looked at how can we impact state policy, but also the public health environment in which those get enacted and taken care of, right? So we want to make sure that we're seeing pieces of legislation at the state that really protect, again, diagnosis, the care journey, and the investments that states are making within their own public health infrastructure. The other side is how can we take this information to the community, right? And we want to impact at the community level where people are receiving their care. So we also, in addition to the policy side on federal and state, we're also looking at the systems of care within a community to make sure that they are implementing any policies or regulations that can deliver better high quality care for individuals within the Alzheimer's and all other dementia community.
So Alzheimer's has been around for a long time, but when you look back at, I mean, we talked a lot about progress, right? I mean, in terms of funding, in terms of what the kind of procedures and care that is now kind of being thought about, being put into action. What do you attribute that progress to over the past few years? What's been the difference maker?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of places, and certainly advocates are a great start. People who raise their voice, who join the movement, and who are using their own personal power to impact policy and the community around them. The other side is researchers. We're seeing a significant amount come out of the pipeline in terms of what research is doing to impact the place we are right now. And we have to ensure that that research bridges to community. It's one thing to have an innovation occur, but then we need the advocates to then pick it up and make sure it happens at the community level as well. But really, what has impacted this moment is our bipartisan congressional champions like Susan Collins and the work that she has done to advance not just research funding, but ensuring that our constituents have the protections that they need to get access to all of this great innovation that is happening now and into the future.
So there's no budget out yet for fiscal year 2026. We heard about the minibus and the work that Senator Collins is doing towards that. We'll have to see if they can get that figured out or not before the end of the year and into January. But what do you think happens when it comes to Alzheimer's funding? Are you optimistic that stays the same, gets increased? As we heard, the president also has that in his budget as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hopeful and confident, quite honestly, about where we are right now. There are too many families who are depending on the momentum that we are seeing right now. And I think Alzheimer's and the related dementias are seeing too much of that momentum to be disappointed from that perspective. But the other side is, we have a very uniting cause. Alzheimer's is a purple issue. It's not red or blue. And we see it as a very uniting congressional piece that is being picked up by multiple people across the board. Senator Collins is a great example, but along with her and her other bipartisan congressional champions, we're seeing some significant movement and potential increases within the budget as well.
All right, before I let you go, what's the one takeaway you hope those in the audience here on C-SPAN, the staffers on the Hill watching, that they take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that right now is a very hopeful time within the Alzheimer's and dementia journey. We are seeing more progress than we have seen in years. And that momentum is going to carry us forward to a new era of care and treatment in the very near future.
All right, Joanne, unfortunately, we are all out of time. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And a big thank you to Senator Collins on a very busy day for making the time, and to the Alzheimer's Association for partnering with us and making conversations like this possible. Have a great day and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.